Hey guys, just a quick thank you to all of you amazing legends that are subscribed. I could not have done it without you. But most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and like this video. It's free and it really helps our small team out. Thank you. I never thought selling an old clock would turn my life upside down. It was just gathering dust in the attic, a family heirloom I barely remembered. Needed some extra cash, so I threw up a quick ad on Craigslist. The guy who showed up seemed normal enough. Friendly smile, well-dressed, maybe in his 40s. He asked a lot of questions about the clock's history, where it came from, how long we'd had it. I didn't think much of it at the time. Collectors are into that stuff, right? He bought the clock for more than I was asking. I was pretty happy with the deal. But a week later, he mailed again. Said he was interested in other antiques I might have. I didn't have anything else listed, but he offered way above market price for some old candlesticks and a mirror. It was weird, but the money was good. I figured why not. He came by, checked out the stuff, and left with a fat wad of cash in my hand. I started thinking maybe I should go through more of our old junk. That's when things got strange. I'd noticed little things going missing around the house. A picture frame here, an old shirt there. Stuff I knew I hadn't sold. I chalked it up to being forgetful or messy at first. But it kept happening. More frequently. More noticeable items. My wife's grandmother's locket vanished from her jewelry box. An old toy car I'd had since childhood disappeared from my desk drawer. I started feeling uneasy, like someone had been in our house, but nothing was ever broken or forced. No signs of a break-in. Just things slowly going missing. I thought about the buyer, how interested he'd been in our family history, how he'd asked so many questions. But surely that was crazy, right? He'd only been in our house twice with us there. Weeks went by. The missing items piled up. I installed a security system, changed the locks. Nothing showed up on the cameras. No alarms triggered. But still, things vanished. I was on edge all the time, jumping at every noise, constantly checking and rechecking our belongings. My wife thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. Then came that night. It was late, maybe 11 p.m. A knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw him, the buyer, standing there with a stuffed bear I recognized from old photos but hadn't seen in years. My blood ran cold. How did he get that? Why was he here? I didn't know in the door. He knocked again, harder. Called out that he just wanted to talk. Said something about completing his collection. I called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. They took a report, but without proof of theft, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I file for a restraining order. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. We packed up everything of value, anything with sentimental meaning, put it all in storage across town, changed our routines, always checking over our shoulders. The police kept an eye on our place for a while, but nothing happened. No more visits, no more missing items. Life slowly returned to normal, or so we thought. Months passed, we started to relax, brought some things back from storage, and one day I came home from work early. The front door was open. I heard movement upstairs. My heart pounding, I crept up the stairs. The guest room door was ajar. I peered in and saw him, the buyer, rummaging through our closet and muttering to himself. I backed away silently, ran outside, and called the cops. This time they caught him. In his car, they found dozens of our belongings. Photos, knickknacks, clothes. Things we didn't even realize were missing. Turns out, he'd been obsessed with our family for years. Distant relation or something. He'd been stealing bits of our lives, piece by piece. Building some twisted shrine to a family he wished was his. They're still finding our stuff in his house. Each recovered item brings a mix of relief and violated feeling. Like he stole more than just things. He stole our sense of safety, our memories. We're moving soon. Can't stand to be in this house anymore. Too many shadows, too many empty spaces where familiar things used to be. Too many reminders of him. I still check the locks 3 times every night. Still catalog our belongings in my head. Still flinch at unexpected knocks. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again. The whole experience has left me questioning everything. Every interaction, every casual encounter. Who else might be out there, watching, waiting? What other seemingly innocent decisions might lead to disaster? I've become paranoid, I know, but can you blame me? This guy wormed his way into our lives through a simple online ad. He seemed so normal at first. how many other wolves are out there in sheep's clothing. The police say he's getting help now, mental health treatment or something. But that doesn't undo what he did to us. Doesn't erase the fear, the violation. We're more careful now. No more selling stuff online. No letting strangers into our home. We become those paranoid people we used to laugh at. But better safe than sorry, right? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't caught it. I'd never thought posting a simple Craigslist ad would turn my life into a nightmare. My small business needed a website upgrade, and I figured hiring a freelance coder would be the easiest solution. The responses came flooding in, but one caught my attention. A guy named Marcus who claimed to have 10 years of experience and a portfolio of impressive work. His rates were reasonable, and his initial emails were professional. I hired him right away, sending him access to my website's backend along with a list of basic updates I needed. The first week went smoothly. He completed the tasks exactly as requested, even adding some nice touches I hadn't thought of. Then things started getting weird. Marcus began sending multiple emails daily about critical improvements he discovered my site needed. At first, I appreciated his dedication, but the suggestions became increasingly aggressive. He'd make changes without asking, and demand additional payment for work I never approved. Every morning, I'd wake up to find new features added to my website, things I never wanted or needed. When I logged into my business email one morning, I found 27 new messages from him, all sent between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Each one detailed another crucial update he wanted to implement. The tone had shifted from professional to obsessive. He started including personal comments about my business hours, my location, and even mentioned specifics about my social media posts from years ago. His emails got more frequent and stranger. He referenced things about my personal life that weren't public information. He knew which coffee shop I worked from on Tuesdays, the name of my dog, even the model of my car. When I didn't respond immediately to his messages, he'd send follow-ups asking if I was at the gym, somehow knowing my exact workout schedule. I decided to end the contract. I sent him a polite email thanking him for his work but explaining I no longer needed his services. His response came within seconds, a single line saying he wasn't finished yet. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications. My business social media accounts were posting things I hadn't written. My company newsletter sent out bizarre messages to all my subscribers. That's when the strange things began happening to my computer. Pop-ups started appearing randomly, always with the same message. I can see you. I ran multiple virus scans, changed all my passwords, but nothing helped. My mouse would sometimes move on its own, opening files and programs without my input. My printer would start randomly printing pages of code in the middle of the night. I received an email from my business's payment processor about suspicious activity. Someone had tried to transfer all my funds to an overseas account. My website started displaying distorted versions of my photos. Customer databases disappeared and reappeared with altered information. My security cameras would turn on and off at random intervals. One night, while working late, my webcam light suddenly turned on. I never use that camera. I keep it covered with tape. But somehow, the tape had been removed. The screen went black and those words appeared again. I can see you. I watched frozen as my cursor moved across the screen, opening my personal photos, my business documents, my banking information. Files I deleted months ago started popping up along with screenshots of private conversations. I shut down my computer and unplugged everything. The next morning, I contacted the police and filed a report. They took it seriously, but said these cases are hard to trace. I hired a cybersecurity expert who helped me secure my network and change all my digital footprints. He found dozens of hidden programs running in the background of my system, all collecting data and sending it to untraceable servers. The attacks eventually stopped, but Marcus vanished completely. His portfolio website disappeared, his email address became invalid, and the phone number he provided was disconnected. The cybersecurity expert said the person I knew as Marcus had likely been using a stolen identity. Every trace of him vanished as quickly as he appeared. It's been 6 months since everything happened. Sometimes my webcam light still flickers, just for a second, and my heart stops. I've moved my business to a new domain and switched to different platforms for everything. I run my website through a major development company now, no more freelancers. I've installed every security measure possible, but I still don't feel safe. The police never found him. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, watching through someone else's screen, waiting for another unsuspecting person to post a simple job listing. I keep my computers unplugged when I'm not using them now, and that tape over my webcam. It's never coming off again. Last week, I've had an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank, but something made me open it. Inside was just one line, "Your new website looks nice." I deleted it immediately, but I know he's still watching. He'll always be watching. I never thought posting a simple pet sitting ad on Craigslist would turn my life upside down. My cat, Max, needed someone to check on him while I was away on business trips, usually just for a few days each month. After my regular sitter moved away, I decided to try my luck online. Within hours of posting, I received an email from Margaret, a retired teacher who lived nearby. Her references checked out perfectly. 3 different families praised her reliability and genuine love for animals. When she came to meet Max, she brought treats and seemed to know exactly how to approach him. Max usually hides from strangers, but he warmed up to her right away. She showed me photos of other pets she cared for and shared sweet stories about them. Everything felt right. The first 2 pet sitting sessions went smoothly. Margaret sent updates with photos, and Max seemed content when I returned. But things started getting weird about a month later. I came home from work one day to find Margaret sitting on my front porch. She said she was just in the neighborhood and wanted to check on Max. I felt uncomfortable but didn't want to seem rude. These unexpected visits became more frequent. She'd show up at random times, sometimes right as I got home from work. Once, she was already in my driveway when I pulled up at 7 a.m. Each time, she had some excuse about being worried about Max or wanting to give him extra attention. After the 4th surprise visit, I sent her a polite email explaining that I only needed her services when specifically requested. Her response made my skin crawl. She wrote about how Max missed her and added that I must miss her too, since we'd become such good friends. That's when I started noticing small things out of place in my house. Max's food bowl would be full when I distinctly remembered it being half empty that morning. His favorite toy would move from the living room to my bedroom. One day, I found my coffee mug in the dishwasher when I was sure I left it in the sink. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, but the unsettling feeling grew stronger. I started double-checking the locks and setting up my phone to record while I was out. But nothing concrete showed up on the recordings, just occasional creaks and Max meows. One evening, I came home to find Max unusually agitated. He kept pacing by the back door and meowing loudly. When I checked, I found muddy footprints on the welcome mat. Footprints that were too small to be mine. My heart raced as I searched the house, but nothing else seemed out of place. I called a locksmith the next day and had all my locks changed. I told him about my concerns, and he recommended installing a security system. It was expensive, but I felt it was necessary for peace of mind. For a few weeks, things seemed to calm down. Margaret stopped showing up unannounced, and I started to relax. Maybe I had overreacted, I thought. Maybe she'd just been overly enthusiastic about her job. Then one Saturday morning, I woke up to find Max's collar on my nightstand. I was sure he'd been wearing it when I went to bed. As I picked it up, a small piece of paper fell out. On it was written, "He's safer without this. Trust me." I called the police immediately. It took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence of a break-in. They suggested I install security cameras and keep a detailed log of any suspicious activity. I followed their advice, setting up cameras both inside and outside my house. I also reached out to Margaret's references again, this time digging deeper. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. 2 of the phone numbers were disconnected. The third belonged to Margaret's sister, who seemed surprised when I mentioned pet sitting. She told me Margaret had never worked as a pet sitter. She'd been let go from her teaching job years ago due to concerning behavior, with students' pets brought in for show and tell. I filed another police report with this new information. It took it more seriously this time, promising to look into Margaret's background. In the meantime, I stayed with a friend, too scared to sleep in my own home. A week later, the police called. They'd found Margaret's apartment empty, with dozens of photos of Max and me plastered on the walls. There were detailed notes about our routines, what we ate when we slept. She'd been watching us for months, long before I even posted the Craigslist ad. I felt sick. How could I have been so blind? The signs were all there, but I'd ignore them, always finding a rational explanation. Now Margaret was in the wind, and I had no idea what she might do next. I decided to stay with my sister in another state for a while. I boarded Max at a high-security pet hotel, not telling anyone where he was. As I packed up my belongings, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Margaret watching from a window or hiding in a corner. The drive to my sister's place was tense. Every car that stayed behind me for too long made my heart race. I checked into a hotel under a false name, too paranoid to drive straight to my sister's house. It's been 2 months now. I'm still at my sister's, too afraid to return home. The police haven't found Margaret, but they think she's left the state. My house is up for sale, and I'm looking for jobs in this new city. Max is back with me, but he seems different, more skittish, always alert. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I imagine I hear footsteps in the hallway or see a shadow move across the room. I know it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but I can't shake the feeling that Margaret is still out there, watching and waiting. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again, but I'm trying to move forward. All I can do now is stay vigilant and hope that one day this will all feel like a distant nightmare. I wanted to declutter and make some extra cash. I posted photos of an old coffee table, some kitchenware, and a few books I'd read too many times. Within a day, I got a message from a woman asking to see everything I had for sale. She seemed interested in multiple items, so I figured it was worth setting up a time for her to come by. We agreed on Saturday afternoon. When she arrived, something fell off right away. She had this intense look in her eyes as she scanned my house from the doorway. Before I could lead her to the items for sale, she'd brushed past me and started wandering through my living room. I was taken aback but tried to be polite. She ran her hand along my bookshelf, picking up framed photos and studying them closely. Her comments about my decor made me uneasy. She knew way too much about interior design trends and kept comparing my house to magazine spreads. As we moved through the kitchen, she opened cabinets and drawers without asking. She even peeked in my fridge, remarking on my food choices. I started to get really uncomfortable and tried to steer her towards the items I was actually selling. But she was fixated on my personal belongings. In my bedroom, she zeroed in on my jewelry box and asked about specific pieces. How did she know I had my grandmother's locket? I never posted anything about that online. I was getting seriously creeped out and tried to wrap things up. She barely glanced at the stuff I was selling. When I prompted her to make an offer, she just sighed wistfully and said she always wanted a house like mine. Finally, after almost 2 hours, I managed to usher her out. She left without buying anything. I was relieved to see her car pull away, but something still felt very wrong. A few days later, I noticed a familiar car parked down the street. It was there in the morning when I left for work and still there when I got home. The next day, same thing. I started closing my curtains and double-checking my locks. Then things started disappearing from my yard. First, it was just a potted plant. Then my wind chimes vanished. One morning, I came out to find my welcome mat gone. I installed security cameras, but they didn't catch anything. The items would vanish in the middle of the night when the cameras only showed darkness. But I knew it had to be her. I became paranoid, constantly looking out my windows and jumping at small noises. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the shadows, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there. One night, I woke up to a sound downstairs. My heart racing, I crept down to investigate. In the dim light, I saw my back door slightly ajar. A chill ran through me as I realized someone had been inside my house. Nothing seemed to be missing, but things were slightly out of place. A chair pushed back, a book moved to a different shelf. It was like someone had been carefully studying my home, memorizing every detail. I called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do without clear evidence of a break-in. I described the woman from Craigslist, but they just told me to keep my doors locked and call if anything else happened. I couldn't sleep after that. Every creak and groan of the house made me bolt upright in bed. I started staying with friends, too scared to be alone in my own home. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Weeks went by, and slowly things seemed to calm down. No more missing items, no more strange cars on my street. I started to think maybe I had imagined it all, blown things out of proportion in my mind. Then one day I came home to find my front door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it that morning. With shaking hands, I pushed it open. Everything looked normal at first glance, but as I moved through the rooms, I realized subtle things had changed. The pillows on my couch were arranged differently. My favorite mug was in the wrong cabinet. A sweater I thought I'd lost was folded neatly on my bed. It was like someone had been living in my house, using my things, but carefully putting everything back in place. I ran outside in a panic, not sure where to go or what to do. As I stood on my front lawn trying to calm down, a car pulled up across the street. The woman from Craigslist stepped out, smiling at me like we were old friends. She waved and called out a cheery greeting, acting like nothing was wrong. I froze, unable to speak or move. She walked up my driveway, still smiling that eerie smile. I knew then that this was far from over. This woman wasn't just a creepy stranger. She had become obsessed with my life, my home, and she wasn't going to stop until she had taken it all for herself. As she got closer, I finally snapped out of my daze and ran back inside, slamming and locking the door. I could hear her knocking, calling out to me in a sing-song voice. I huddled in my bedroom, frantically calling the police. By the time they arrived, she was gone, but I knew she'd be back. This was her house now, too, in her twisted mind, and I had no idea how to make it stop. I never thought a simple Craigslist ad could lead to such a nightmare. It all started when I decided to sell my barely used designer handbag. Money was tight, and I figured someone else might appreciate it more than I did. I posted the ad with a few photos at a reasonable price. Within hours, I got a response from a woman named Sarah. She seemed eager to buy the bag and insisted on meeting at my place. I was hesitant at first, but she came across as friendly and trustworthy in her messages. We agreed on a time, and Sarah arrived punctually. She was well-dressed and polite, appearing to be in her mid-30s. I invited her in and showed her the handbag. She examined it carefully, asking questions about its authenticity and condition. Everything seemed normal until Sarah started getting curious about other items in my home. She complimented my decor and asked if I had any other designer pieces. I mentioned a few things offhandedly, not thinking much of it. That's when things took a strange turn. Sarah began asking to see my closet, claiming she might be interested in buying more items. I felt uncomfortable but didn't want to be rude. I showed her a couple of things, hoping she'd be satisfied and leave. But Sarah's questions kept coming. She wanted to know about my jewelry, other bags, and even electronics. Her friendly demeanor started to feel forced, and I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I politely told Sarah I had other commitments and needed to wrap up our meeting. She seemed disappointed but agreed to leave. As she walked out, I noticed her glancing around, as if memorizing the layout of my home. I thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later, Sarah messaged me again. This time, her questions were more personal. She asked about my work schedule when I usually left the house, and if I lived alone. Red flags went up immediately. I didn't respond to her messages, hoping she'd get the hint. But Sarah persisted, sending follow-up texts that grew increasingly pushy. I blocked her number and tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. A week passed, and I started to relax. Maybe I had overreacted, I thought. Sarah was probably just socially awkward, not dangerous. Then it happened. I came home from work one day to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I cautiously entered my house. The place was a mess, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, and items strewn across the floor. As I surveyed the damage, I realized something odd. My TV, laptop, and other electronics were untouched. Instead, the burglar had targeted my closet and jewelry box. All my designer bags, including the one I had shown Sarah, were gone. My jewelry, both costume and fine pieces, had vanished too. I called the police immediately. It took my statement and dusted for fingerprints, but I already knew who was behind this. It had to be Sarah or someone working with her. The officers were sympathetic, but not very optimistic. Without concrete evidence linking Sarah to the crime, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to be more careful about letting strangers into my home and suggested installing a security system. In the days that followed, I felt violated and scared. I kept replaying the meeting with Sarah in my mind, kicking myself for not trusting my instincts. How could I have been so foolish? I changed my locks, installed cameras, and became much more cautious about my online presence. The incident taught me a harsh lesson about the dangers lurking behind seemingly innocent interactions. Weeks turned into months, and the police never found Sarah or my stolen items. I learned to be more vigilant, but the experience left a lasting impact. Every time I heard a noise at night or noticed someone lingering too long outside my house, my heart would race. Looking back, I realized how easily criminals can exploit our trust and politeness. What seemed like harmless curiosity was actually Sarah scoping out my home and belongings. Her persistent messages were attempts to gather information about when I'd be away. The whole ordeal made me reconsider how I interact with strangers, especially online. Now, I always meet in public places for any transactions and never share personal details. It's sad that we have to be so guarded, but it's better than becoming a victim. I still use Craigslist occasionally, but with much more caution. I'm always on high alert for any red flags or unusual behavior. The experience taught me that not everyone is who they seem to be, and it's okay to trust your gut when something feels off. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah was working alone or part of a larger operation. How many other unsuspecting sellers had she targeted? The thought still sends chills down my spine. In the end, I lost some valuable possessions, but I gained an important lesson in personal safety. I hope sharing my story might help others avoid falling into similar traps. Remember, if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Stay safe out there, folks. It all started when my sink decided to give up on me. I'm not exactly handy, so I figured I'd turn to Craigslist to find someone who could fix it without breaking the bank. After scrolling through a bunch of ads, I came across one that seemed perfect. A guy named Mike who promised quality work at affordable rates. I reached out to Mike, and he got back to me pretty quickly. We set up a time for him to come check out the sink, and I was impressed when he showed up right on schedule. He seemed friendly enough, and he fixed the sink in no time. I was relieved to have found someone reliable, especially since there were a few other small repairs I'd been putting off around the house. Over the next couple of days, I started getting messages from Mike. At first, they were just follow-ups about the sink, making sure everything was working okay. But then he started mentioning other things he'd noticed while he was at my place. A loose floorboard here, a creaky door there. Nothing major, but enough to make me wonder if I should have him come back to take care of those issues too. Before I could even decide, Mike showed up at my door unannounced. He said he was in the neighborhood and thought he'd stop by to check on things. I was a bit taken aback, but I let him in. He walked around, pointing out all these little problems I'd never even noticed before. He kept saying how important it was to fix things before they got worse, how he wanted to make sure I was safe in my own home. At first, I appreciated his concern, but as the days went on, Mike's behavior started to make me uncomfortable. He'd show up without warning, sometimes early in the morning or late at night. He always had an excuse. He was just passing by, or he had a feeling something might be wrong. Each time, he'd find something new that needed fixing, insisting that he was the only one who could protect me from these potential disasters. I started to feel like I was losing control in my own home. Mike seemed to know every inch of the place better than I did. He talked about the wiring in the walls, the pipes under the floors, things I couldn't even see. It was like he was trying to convince me that my house was falling apart around me and only he could save it. After about a week of this, I decided enough was enough. The next time Mike showed up unannounced, I told him I didn't need any more work done. I tried to be polite but firm, thanking him for his help but saying I was all set for now. Mike didn't take it well. His friendly demeanor disappeared, and he got this cold look in his eyes. He told me I'd be sorry if I didn't let him finish what he'd started. Then he left, and I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that would be the end of it. But that night, I started hearing strange noises. It seemed to be coming from the areas where Mike had worked. The sink, the loose floorboard, the creaky door. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling or my imagination running wild. But as the night wore on, the sounds got louder and more frequent. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mike had done something to my house. Had he messed the repairs he'd made? Left something behind in the walls or under the floors? I found myself tiptoeing around my own home, afraid to touch anything or make any noise. The next day, I called a different handyman to come check things out. He looked over Mike's work and found several things that had been done incorrectly or left unfinished. It was like Mike had deliberately set things up to fail. I changed the locks and installed a security system, but I still didn't feel safe. Every creak and groan of the house made me jump. I kept expecting to see Mike's face at the window or hear his voice calling out from some hidden corner. Weeks went by, and there was no sign of Mike. Gradually, I started to relax, convincing myself that it had all been a misunderstanding. Maybe Mike was just overzealous about his work, not malicious. Maybe the noises were just normal house sounds that I'd never noticed before. But then one night, I woke up to the sound of running water. I followed the noise to the bathroom, where I found the sink, the very first thing Mike had fixed, overflowing. Water was pouring out, seeping into the hallway carpet. As I rushed to turn it off, I noticed something scratched into the mirror. Should have let me protect you. Now, months later, I still lived with the fear that Mike might return. I've learned to do my own repairs, unwilling to trust another stranger in my home. Every time I hear an unexpected noise or see a shadow move, I wonder if it's him. The experience has made me wary of trusting people too quickly, especially when it comes to my personal space. Looking back, I realize how easily things can spiral out of control. What started as a simple Craigslist ad for a handyman turned into a nightmare that I'm still trying to wake up from. I've learned to trust my instincts and set clear boundaries, even if it means being a bit less trusting. Sometimes, late at night, I still find myself lying awake, listening for any unusual sounds in the house. And every now and then, I could swear I hear footsteps or the faint sound of tools being used. In those moments, I can't help but wonder, is Mike still out there, waiting for his chance to finish what he started? It was just supposed to be a quick way to find some help moving. I'd done it before without any issues. This time was different. The day started normally enough. I was packing up my small apartment, getting ready for the big move across town. I posted an ad looking for an extra pair of hands, offering fair pay and pizza. Nothing fancy, just a standard moving gig. A guy showed up right on time. He was quiet, maybe in his mid-30s, and seemed eager to get started. I didn't think much of it at first. We got work, loading boxes into my rental truck. As we worked, he started making small talk. Normal stuff at first, asking about the weather, commenting on how heavy some boxes were. But then his questions started getting more personal. He wanted to know why I was moving, if I was leaving anything behind. I figured he was just being friendly, trying to pass the time while we worked. But something felt off. His questions became more specific, more invasive. He asked about my job, my family, even my daily routine. It was like he was fishing for information, but I couldn't figure out why. I started getting uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude. After all, he was helping me move. When I asked how he found my ad, his answer gave me chills. He just said he liked helping people like me. His tone was friendly, but something in his eyes made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about me than he should. We finished loading the truck in tense silence. I paid him and watched him leave, feeling relieved it was over. I hoped I was just being paranoid, reading too much into things. A week after settling into my new place, I got a letter. No return address, just my name and new address written in neat handwriting. Inside was a short note describing where I'd been the day before and who I'd met for coffee. It was signed, your friend. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe a prank from a new neighbor who'd see me around. But deep down I knew better. More letters came. Each one had details about my life, where I'd been, who I'd talked to, what I'd worn. Things no random person could know. They were always signed the same way. Your friend. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I changed my routines, took different routes to work, varied my schedule. But the letters kept coming. It was like he was always watching, always one step ahead. I thought about going to the police, but what could I tell them? I had no proof it was the guy who helped me move. No threats had been made. On paper, they were just friendly letters from someone who knew me well. Months passed. The letters became a constant in my life, arriving like clockwork. Sometimes they contained photos. Me at the grocery store, walking my dog, meeting friends for dinner. Always from a distance, always my thought I was alone. I became a nervous wreck. I installed security cameras, changed my locks, even considered moving again. But I knew it wouldn't matter. He'd find me. He always did. The worst part was not knowing why. Why me? What do you want? The letters never asked for anything, never threatened me. They were almost chatty, like updates from a close friend. But each one was a reminder that I was never truly alone, never safe. I started seeing it everywhere. In the crowd at the mall, across the street when I got home from work, in the car behind me at stoplights. Was it really him, or was I losing my mind? I couldn't tell anymore. My friends noticed a change in me. I became withdrawn, jumpy. I made excuses to avoid going out. How could I explain that I was being watched, that nowhere felt safe anymore? One day, I decided to try and turn the tables. I started keeping a detailed log of when and where I received each letter. I noted patterns, trying to find some clue about his movements or schedule. It felt good to be doing something, anything to fight back. I also began to pay more attention to the people around me. Was that the same man I saw at the coffee shop yesterday? Did that woman in the park look familiar? I scrutinized every face, searching for any sign of recognition or guilt. The letters kept coming, but now I read them differently. I looked for clues in the wording and the paper used and the postmarks. I became obsessed with finding some trace of my stalker's identity. Weeks turned into months. My life became a strange dance of paranoia and investigation. I was both hunter and hunted, never sure which role I was playing at any given moment. Then, one day, something changed. A letter arrived that was different from the others. It contained a single photograph, not of me, but of a house. I recognized it immediately. It was my childhood home, a place I hadn't visited in years. The note attached simply said where it all began. Remember. My mind raced. What did this mean? Was this a clue to his identity or just another mind game? I spent days poring over old photos, yearbooks, anything that might give me a lead. I even considered going back to my old neighborhood, but the thought of walking into what could be a trap kept me away. Instead, I dug deeper into my past, trying to remember anyone who might have a reason to do this to me. The next letter came sooner than usual. This time, it was a photo of my high school. Another piece of my past, another cryptic message. You were always kind to me. I racked my brain, trying to remember every interaction, every person I'd known back then. Was this someone I helped? Someone I hurt without realizing it? The possibilities seemed endless. As the days passed, more photos arrived. My first job, the park where I used to hang out with friends. Each one a snapshot of my life, each accompanied by a short, cryptic message. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every memory, every part of my past, was now tainted by this intrusion. I couldn't look at old photos without wondering if he was there, hidden in the background, watching even then. The most recent letter arrived yesterday. It was different from the others. No photo this time, just a short note. It's time we talked, face to face. My heart raced as I read those words. Part of me was terrified, but another part felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, this might be coming to an end, one way or another. The note gave a time and place, a small coffee shop downtown, tomorrow afternoon. Public, but not too crowded. A place where we could talk without drawing attention. I don't know if I'll sleep tonight, but I know that tomorrow, one way or another, everything changes. And I'll be there, ready to face whatever comes next. I never thought selling an old mirror would turn my life upside down. It all started during our annual spring cleaning. My wife and I were sorting through the clutter in our attic when we stumbled upon this antique, full-length mirror that had been in my family for generations. It was ornate with an intricate golden frame, but it had been gathering dust up there for years. We decided it was time to let it go. I snapped a few photos and listed it on Craigslist, thinking it would be an easy sale. Within hours, I got a response from a guy named Mark. He seemed really interested, so we arranged to meet the next day. When Mark came to pick up the mirror, I noticed something odd about him. He kept staring at his reflection, almost transfixed. I chalked it up to him admiring his purchase, but looking back, I should have seen it as a red flag. He paid in cash, loaded the mirror into his truck, and that was that. Or so I thought. A few days later, I received an email from Mark. He was asking if the mirror had any history or if anything strange had ever happened with it. I didn't think much of it and told him it was just an old family heirloom. I figured he was probably trying to determine its value or something. But then the messages started getting weirder. Mark claimed he was seeing things in the mirror, shadows moving when no one was around, faces that weren't his own. He begged me to take it back, even offering to pay extra. I ignored him at first, thinking he was trying to pull some kind of scam, or maybe he was just a bit unstable. The emails kept coming, though, getting more and more frantic. Mark insisted something was seriously wrong with the mirror. He said he couldn't sleep, that he felt like he was being watched all the time. I started to feel uneasy, but I still didn't believe anything supernatural was going on. I suggested he seek help if he was having issues, but I refused to take the mirror back. Then, late one night, there was a pounding at my door. I'd opened it to find Mark standing there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to be there. Mark pleaded with me to take the mirror back. He said he'd do anything, pay any amount. Something in his voice and desperation in his eyes made me realize this wasn't a joke or a scam. This guy was genuinely terrified. Against my better judgment, I agreed to take the mirror back. Mark's relief was palpable. He thanked me repeatedly and hurried off into the night. I figured that would be the end of this strange episode. But when I went into my living room later that evening, my blood ran cold. There, leaning against the wall, was a mirror. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there earlier. As I approached it, I noticed a crumpled note on the floor in front of it. With shaking hands, I picked up the note and read the scrawled message. "It won't leave me alone." I felt a chill run down my spine. How had the mirror gotten here? Where was Mark? I tried calling him, but his number was disconnected. I even drove by the address he'd given me when he bought the mirror, but the house was empty and for sale. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I heard noises coming from the living room. When I finally worked up the courage to check, the mirror was exactly where it had been, but something felt off. I could have sworn the reflection wasn't quite right, like there was a slight delay between my movements and what I saw in the glass. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. I'd catch glimpses of shadows in my peripheral vision. And always, there was the mirror, silent and imposing in my living room. I tried to get rid of it. I listed it online again, but no one responded. I tried to donate it, but thrift stores wouldn't take it. I even tried to throw it away, but when I came home from work, it was back in the living room, not a scratch on it. My wife thought I was losing my mind. She couldn't see anything wrong with the mirror and didn't notice any of the strange occurrences. We started arguing more and more, and eventually she left to stay with her sister. I was alone in the house with that damn mirror. I started having trouble at work. I couldn't concentrate, and I was constantly exhausted from lack of sleep. My boss noticed and suggested I take some time off. I agreed, hoping that getting away from the house might help. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend in the next town over. But even there, I couldn't escape. I'd see my reflection in windows and puddles on the street, always watching, always smiling in a way I never did. I started to feel like I was going crazy. My friend tried to be supportive, but I could tell he thought I was losing it. After a few days, he suggested I see a therapist. I agreed, thinking maybe this was all in my head. The therapist listened to my story and prescribed some anti-anxiety medication. She suggested that the stress of selling a family heirloom might have triggered some kind of psychological episode. I wanted to believe her, to think that there was a rational explanation for everything that had happened. But when I returned to my friend's place after the therapy session, I froze in the doorway. There in his living room was the mirror. My friend was confused, asking where it had come from. He hadn't brought it in, and no one else had been in the house. That was the last straw. I couldn't take any more. I got in my car and just started driving, no destination in mind. I drove for hours, trying to put as much distance between myself and that mirror as possible. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape. I'd see my reflection everywhere, in store windows, in the rearview mirror, even in my phone screen. And it wasn't always my reflection looking back at me. It's been weeks now, and I don't know what to do. The mirror seems to be everywhere. No matter where I go, I can feel it calling to me, pulling me in. Sometimes when I look into it, I swear I can see something moving behind my reflection, reaching out. I'm writing this as a warning. Be careful what you bring into your home, what history might be attached to old objects. And if you ever come across an ornate, full-length mirror with an intricate golden frame, walk away. Don't look into it. Don't take it home, because once it has you, it won't let go. It all started when I posted an ad for my barely used designer purse. I needed some extra cash and figured someone would appreciate getting a high-end bag at a discount. A woman responded to my ad pretty quickly. She seemed nice enough in her messages, asking about the condition of the bag and if I had any more photos. I sent her a few more pics, and she said she was definitely interested. That's when things started to get a bit weird. She insisted on meeting at my house to see the bag in person. I usually prefer to meet buyers in public places for safety, but she was adamant. She said she lived nearby, and it would be more convenient. Against my better judgment, I agreed and gave her my address. The day of our meeting arrived, and it was a bundle of nerves. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before answering. The woman standing there looked normal enough, maybe in her 30s, well-dressed with a friendly smile. I invited her in and showed her the handbag. At first, everything seemed fine. She inspected the bag carefully, checking the stitching and hardware. But then she started asking about other items I might be selling. Did I have any other designer bags? What about jewelry? She wanted to see my closet just in case there was anything else she might like to buy. I was getting uncomfortable with her probing questions and nausiness. I politely told her I wasn't selling anything else at the moment, but she kept pushing, asking to see other rooms of my house. That's when alarm bells really started going off in my head. I firmly told her it was time for her to leave. She left without buying the bag, and I breathed a sigh of relief once she was gone. I thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later she messaged me again. This time her questions were even more unsettling. She wanted to know my work schedule and when I was usually home or out of the house. I didn't respond and blocked her number. I tried to put the whole thing out of my mind, but about a week later I came home from work to find my front door ajar. My stomach dropped as I cautiously entered my house. It had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, closets emptied, but the burglars had been selective. My electronics and other valuables were untouched. Only my jewelry and designer bags were missing. I called the police right away, but I already knew who was behind it. They took a report that without any hard evidence linking the woman to the crime, there wasn't much they could do. I was left feeling violated and unsafe in my own home. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. Her insistence on coming to my house, the nosy questions about my belongings, trying to get information about when I'd be home. I'd been so eager to make the sale that I overlooked my own instincts telling me something wasn't right. Since then, I've become much more cautious about online transactions. I never give out my address or agree to meet at my home. I'm careful about what personal information I share. And I always trust my gut if something feels off about a potential buyer. The whole experience shook me up pretty badly. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Every little noise made me jump. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, thinking of all the things I should have done differently. I installed a security system and new locks, but it took a long time before I felt safe in my house again. The financial loss was tough, but the feeling of having my privacy invaded was even worse. It's scary to think that someone could gain access to your home and personal information so easily. I'm just grateful it wasn't worse, that I wasn't home when they broke in. I've heard similar stories from other people who've had bad experiences with online marketplaces. It's made me realize how vulnerable we can be when we let strangers into our lives, even in small ways. Now I'm much more careful about what I share online and who I interact with. Despite everything, I still use sites like Craigslist occasionally, but I'm smarter about it now. I meet in public places, bring a friend when possible, and trust my instincts. If something feels off, I don't hesitate to back out of a deal. Now I know firsthand how important it is to be cautious and protect yourself, even in seemingly harmless situations like selling a handbag online. I hope sharing my story might help someone else avoid a similar situation. It's a reminder to always prioritize your safety over making a sale or being polite. In the end, no amount of money is worth putting yourself at risk. I decided to replace my old, worn-out sofa. Money was tight, so I turned to Craigslist hoping to find a good deal. After scrolling through countless listings, I found a nice leather sectional at a great price. The seller seemed friendly enough over text, and we arranged for delivery the following weekend. When delivery day arrived, I was excited to finally have a comfortable place to sit. The truck pulled up right on time, and a man in his mid-40s hopped out. He introduced himself as the seller and started unloading the couch. As he brought the pieces inside, he kept up a steady stream of chatter. At first, I thought he was just being friendly, but his questions started to make me uneasy. He asked if I lived alone and commented on how quiet the neighborhood seemed. When I mentioned having a roommate who was out of town, his eyes lit up with interest. He took his time arranging the couch, all while looking around my living room and making observations about my belongings. I tried to keep my responses short, hoping he'd take the hint and leave once the job was done. Finally, after what felt like hours, he finished setting up the couch. I thanked him and walked him to the door, eager to have my space back to myself. As he left, he lingered on the porch, still talking. It took some firm goodbyes before he finally got in his truck and drove away. I breathed a sigh of relief and tried to shake off the weird feeling he'd given me. For a few days, everything was normal. I enjoyed my new couch and started to forget about the odd delivery experience. Then, about a week later, I noticed a familiar truck parked across the street from my house. My stomach dropped as I recognized it as the delivery guy's vehicle. I watched from behind the curtains, but he never got out. After about an hour, he drove away. That night, I received a message from him asking if everything was okay with the couch. He said he'd been in the neighborhood and wanted to make sure I was satisfied with my purchase. I didn't respond, hoping he'd get the message that I wasn't interested in further contact. But he didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, his truck would show up at random times. Sometimes in the morning as I left for work, other times in the evening when I returned home. He never approached me directly, but his presence was impossible to ignore. One day, I came home to find him standing on my porch with a small end table. He claimed he had another delivery for me, even though I hadn't ordered anything. I refused to open the door, telling him through the window that there must be a mistake. He insisted it was for me becoming more agitated when I wouldn't let him in. Eventually, he left the table on the porch and drove away. The situation escalated from there. He started leaving gifts on my porch, small pieces of furniture I never ordered, always with a note saying they were meant to complement my couch. I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't understand why this man was so fixated on me or my home. I tried reporting him to the police, but without any direct threats or break-ins. They said there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I document everything and call immediately if he ever tried to enter my home. Their lack of concern left me feeling helpless and alone. My friends and family were worried, but no one knew what to do. I started changing up my routine, leaving for work at different times and sometimes staying with friends. I installed security cameras and extra locks, jumping at every little noise. The constant stress was taking its toll on my mental health. I became paranoid, always looking over my shoulder and checking for his truck. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart would race, fearing it was another message from him. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers and became wary of any unexpected packages or deliveries. My once comfortable home now felt like a prison. I drew the curtains tight and kept the lights low, hoping to give the impression that no one was home. I even considered moving, but the thought of him somehow finding my new address terrified me even more. The stress started affecting my work and relationships. I was constantly on edge, snapping at coworkers and friends over minor issues. My boss noticed my declining performance and suggested I take some time off. But the thought of being home all day, potentially exposed to his random visits, was even worse. I tried to find out more about him online, hoping to understand why he was doing this, but searching his name and the phone number he used for the Craigslist ad turned up nothing. It was like he didn't exist outside of our interactions, which made the whole situation even more unsettling. As weeks turned into months, his behavior became more erratic. The furniture he left started getting stranger, broken pieces, items that looked like they'd been salvaged from a junkyard. The notes became more personal, referencing conversations we'd never had and events that never happened. I started to wonder if I was losing touch with reality. Had I somehow encouraged this behavior without realizing it? Was I overreacting to an overly enthusiastic salesman? But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. The fear I felt was real, and I needed to do something about it. I reached out to a local support group for stalking victims, hoping to find some guidance. They helped me create a safety plan and encouraged me to keep pushing for help from law enforcement. With their support, I felt a little less alone in my struggle. One night, I woke up to a notification from my security camera. Heart pounding, I checked the footage to see the delivery man trying to peer through my windows. That was the final straw. I called the police, and this time they took my concerns seriously. They arrived quickly and caught him still lurking around my property. It turned out he had a history of stalking that hadn't shown up in his initial background check. The police found evidence in his truck linking him to several other cases in the area. Knowing he was finally facing consequences brought some relief, but the fear and anxiety lingered. In the aftermath, I struggled to feel safe in my own home. The couch that had started it all became a constant reminder of the ordeal. I ended up donating it and replacing all the furniture in my living room, trying to reclaim my space. While I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I'll come out of it stronger and more resilient. I'm more appreciative of the simple joys of feeling safe and comfortable in my own space. And though it took time, I've reclaimed my home and my life from the shadow of fear that once loomed over everything. It all started when I decided to clear out some clutter from my apartment. I'd been meaning to do it for ages, but finally got around to listing a few things on Craigslist. Nothing fancy, just an old coffee table, a lamp I never used, and some books I already read. I wasn't expecting much interest, to be honest. So when a guy messaged me almost immediately, saying he wanted to come see everything, I was pretty surprised. He showed up that same evening, a tall guy with dark hair and intense eyes. What struck me most was how eager he seemed to buy my stuff. He barely looked at the items before agreeing to take them all, offering way more than I'd asked for. I thought it was weird, but hey, who was I to complain about getting extra cash? He loaded everything into his truck and left, but not before asking if I had anything else I wanted to sell. I told him no, thinking that would be the end of it. But a few days later, he messaged me again. He wanted to know if I'd reconsidered, if there was anything else I was ready to get rid of. I found a few more things: an old guitar I never learned to play, some kitchen appliances I rarely used. Once again, he showed up, paid generously, and left with my stuff. This pattern continued for weeks. He'd message every few days, always using that same phrase: anything else you're ready to get rid of? At first, I was happy to declutter and make some extra money. But as time went on, his requests became more frequent and more insistent. He started asking about things I clearly wasn't selling: my bed, my favorite armchair, the painting my grandmother had given me. When I refused, he'd back off, but always with a comment like, "No worries, I'll check in again soon." It was starting to creep me out. I tried to put an end to it. I told him I didn't have anything else to sell, that he should stop messaging me. But he'd always find a way to circle back, asking if I was ready yet. Ready for what? I wasn't sure. The final straw came when I returned home one day to find a note slipped under my door. It simply said, "I'll know when you're ready to sell everything." That's when I decided to block his number and delete my Craigslist account. I thought that would be the end of it. For a while, things seemed to go back to normal. I didn't hear from him, and I started to relax. But then I noticed little things going missing around my apartment. At first, it was small stuff I could easily misplace: a favorite mug, a pair of earrings. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. But then bigger things started disappearing. I came home one day to find my tea gone. Another day, it was my laptop. I was sure I'd locked my door, but there were never any signs of a break-in. It was like things were just vanishing. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I'd double and triple check that I'd locked up, but items would still go missing. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was him, somehow getting into my apartment when I was out. But how? And why? The situation reached a breaking point last week. I had a long day at work and was looking forward to collapsing on my couch with a glass of wine. But when I opened my apartment door, I froze. The place was empty. Everything, my furniture, my clothes, my photos, everything was gone. In the middle of the bare living room floor was a single envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a check for an amount that made my eyes widen, along with a note that simply said, "Thanks for being ready." I stood there in shock, trying to process what had happened. How had he gotten in? How had he taken everything without anyone noticing? And why? What was the point of all this? I called the police, of course. They took my statement, but without any signs of forced entry and with that check in my hand. They seemed skeptical. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't take it seriously. So now I'm staying with a friend, trying to figure out what to do next. I can't bring myself to cash that check, even though I desperately need the money to replace my things. It feels too much like accepting what he did. I keep replaying everything in my mind, wondering if I missed some warning sign, some clue about what was really going on. But all I can think about is how normal it all seemed at first. Just a guy buying some secondhand stuff on Craigslist. I don't know what his end game was. Was it all some elaborate theft, a twisted game, or something even darker that I can't fathom? All I know is that I'll never look at online marketplaces the same way again, and I'll always wonder if he's out there waiting for his next seller to be ready. I never thought a simple Craigslist ad would turn my life upside down. It all started when my computer started acting up. The screen would freeze, programs crash randomly, and it took forever to boot up. Being tech illiterate, I decided to post an ad on Craigslist looking for someone to fix it. Within hours, I got a response from a guy named Mike. He seemed friendly and knowledgeable, offering to come over the next day. I was relieved to find help so quickly. Mike arrived right on time. He was in his late 20s, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. Nothing about him seemed off. He got to work immediately, clicking through various screens and running diagnostics. After about an hour, he announced that he fixed the issue, a combination of malware and outdated drivers. I reached for my wallet, but Mike waved it off. He said not to worry about payment, that he was happy to help. However, he mentioned needing my Wi-Fi password to complete the setup. It seemed odd, but I figured he knew what he was doing. I gave him the password, thanked him, and he left. The next few days were normal. My computer worked great, and I was happy with the service. But then things started to get weird. I got a text from an unknown number, asking if I was enjoying my fixed computer. It was Mike. I hadn't given him my number, so I was confused about how he got it. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had given it to him and forgotten, but the texts kept coming. At first, they were innocent enough, asking how the computer was running if I needed any help. Then they got more specific. He'd mentioned websites I'd visited or referenced things from my private messages. It was unsettling. I started to feel like someone was watching me through my screen. I'd close my laptop and still feel eyes on me. Paranoia set in. I began to second guess every click, every search. I texted Mike, asking him to stop. His response chilled me. He just wanted to make sure I was safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt violated. I tried blocking his number, but he'd text from new ones. I changed my Wi-Fi password, but it didn't help. He seemed to know everything I did online. Desperate, I took my computer to a professional tech shop. They found sophisticated spyware buried deep in my system. It had been sending all my data to an untraceable server. They removed it, but the damage was done. I tried to find Mike to confront him or report him to the police, but he had vanished. The phone numbers were burners. The email address bounced back. It was like he never existed. Now I'm left with a lingering sense of violation. My private life had been laid bare to a stranger, all because I trusted someone to fix my computer. I've become paranoid about my online presence. I cover my webcam, use VPNs, and change passwords frequently, but it doesn't feel like enough. The experience has made me realize how vulnerable we all are in the digital age. We invite technology into our homes, our personal spaces, without fully understanding the risks. We trust strangers with our devices, our data, our lives. I've learned my lesson the hard way. Now I'm extra cautious about who I let near my devices. I've educated myself on basic tech maintenance and security. It's not foolproof, but it's a start. The incident has changed how I view privacy and trust. Every time I post something online or send a message, I wonder who might be watching. It's a sobering thought, one that stays with me. I still use Craigslist, but with extreme caution. I'd never invite service providers to my home unless they're from established companies. And I certainly never give out my Wi-Fi password. Sometimes late at night, I still feel like someone's watching. I know it's probably just paranoia, but the feeling lingers. It's a constant reminder of how one small decision can have far-reaching consequences. I've tried to move on, to not let this experience define me, but it's hard. The internet, once a place of endless possibilities, now feels like a minefield. Every click, every download, every interaction carries a hint of risk. I've shared my story with friends and family, warning them to be careful. Some think I'm overreacting, but others have taken it to heart. If nothing else, I hope my experience serves as a cautionary tale. Looking back, I see all the red flags I missed. The free service, the insistence on my Wi-Fi password, the unexplained knowledge of my online activities. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. I often wonder about Mike. Who was he really? What was his motivation? Was I specifically targeted or just a random victim? These questions keep me up at night sometimes. The whole ordeal has made me appreciate my offline life more. I spend more time with friends in person, read physical books, and try to disconnect regularly. It's been a silver lining in this dark cloud. But the internet is an unavoidable part of modern life. I can't simply go off-grid. So I had to find a balance between staying connected and protecting myself. It's not easy, but it's necessary. I hope sharing this story helps someone else avoid a similar fate. Trust your instincts, be cautious with your personal information, and remember that not everyone online has good intentions. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time, rebuilding my sense of security, relearning how to trust. It's a slow process, but I'm getting there. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the biggest threats come from the most unexpected places. So the next time you need computer help, think twice before letting a stranger into your digital life. It might just save you from a nightmare you never saw coming. Money was tight, so I figured I'd try to save some cash on movers by checking Craigslist. Big mistake. After scrolling through a bunch of listings, I found one that caught my eye. The price was way lower than any of the professional moving companies I'd looked at. The ad promised efficient service, and even offered same-day availability. It seemed too good to be true, but I was desperate to stick to my budget. I sent a message to the poster, and within minutes, I got a response. We arranged for the move to happen the following day. I was impressed by how accommodating they were with such short notice. The next morning, right on time, a plain white van pulled up outside my apartment building. Two guys hopped out, looking ready to work. They were both pretty muscular, wearing worn jeans and faded t-shirts. One had a bunch of tattoos on his arms, while the other sported a scruffy beard. They didn't look like your typical movers, but I figured that's why their rates were so low. Without much chit-chat, they got straight to work. I was amazed at how quickly they moved, carrying out boxes and furniture like they weighed nothing. They barely broke a sweat as they loaded up the van. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found such efficient movers. In less than 2 hours, they had my entire apartment packed up and ready to go. I locked up my old place and headed over to the new apartment, excited to start unpacking and settling in. The movers said they'd follow right behind me. But when I arrived at my new place, the van was nowhere in sight. I figured they must have gotten stuck in traffic or something, so I waited, and waited, and waited some more. After about an hour, I started to get worried. I tried calling the number they'd given me, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text asking where they were, and to my relief, I had a quick response saying they were running late but on their way. That made me feel a little better, so I decided to grab some lunch while I waited. When I got back, the van still wasn't there. I sent another text. This time, the reply said they'd had van trouble but would be there soon. Hours turned into a full day. My texts became more frantic, but the replies kept making excuses. Van problems turned into a family emergency, then a mix-up with the address. Each time they promised they were just around the corner. By the second day, reality started to sink in. These guys weren't late. They weren't coming at all. They had taken off with everything I owned. I felt sick to my stomach. How could I have been so stupid? I called the police, but they didn't seem too hopeful. They took down all the information and said they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't expect to find anything. Desperate for any lead, I started scouring online marketplaces, hoping to spot my stuff for sale. After days of searching, I finally hit pay dirt. Their local buy and sell site was my couch. The same worn spot on the arm, the same coffee stain on the cushion. It was definitely mine. Heart pounding, I sent a message to the seller, trying to sound casual. I asked about the couch, fishing for any information that might help me track down the thieves. But the seller was cagey, dodging my questions and giving vague answers. I tried a different approach, creating a new account and expressing interest in some of the other furniture listed by the same seller. But as soon as I started asking for details or trying to arrange a meetup, the seller would go quiet. It was maddening. My stuff was right there, being sold off piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do about it. I shared the listings with the police, but they said it wasn't enough evidence to act on. They needed proof that these specific items were mine, which I didn't have. Weeks went by, and I watched helplessly as more and more of my belongings popped up for sale. My TV, my dresser, even the weird lamp my aunt had given me for Christmas. Each listing was like a punch to the gut. I ended up sleeping on the floor of my empty new apartment, using a sleeping bag I had to borrow from a friend. Every time I heard a van outside, I'd rush to the window, half hoping to see my stuff finally arriving. But it never did. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I missed. The price that was too good to be true. The lack of a proper company name or website. The way the movers rushed through everything without doing a proper inventory. I've learned my lesson the hard way. Now, I triple check every service I hire. I get references, I read reviews, I ask for proof of insurance. It might take more time and cost more money, but it's worth it for the peace of mind. As for my stuff, I'm still keeping an eye out. Maybe one day I'll spot something that I can definitively prove is mine. Until then, I'm slowly rebuilding my life one piece of furniture at a time. And you can bet I'm not using Craigslist to find movers ever again. It was just a simple appliance barely used, and I figured someone might want it. Within an hour of posting, I got a message from a guy named Mark who seemed eager to buy it. We agreed on a price and set up a meeting at a local coffee shop. When we met, Mark seemed normal enough. He was polite, maybe a bit too friendly, but nothing alarming. He examined the toaster oven and happily paid the agreed amount. Then, to my surprise, he insisted on giving me an extra $20 for my kindness. I tried to refuse, but he was adamant, saying I deserved it for being so nice. I felt a bit uncomfortable, but accepted it to avoid making a scene. A week later, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a cute little ceramic owl figurine with a note thanking me again for the toaster oven. I thought it was a bit odd but sweet. I put it on my bookshelf and didn't think much of it. But then another package arrived the next week, and another the week after that. Soon, I was getting gifts from Mark almost every other day. At first, they were harmless things like keychains, bookmarks, and small decorative items. I started to feel uneasy about the frequency, but tried to convince myself he was just an overly grateful person. Things took a turn when I received a package containing a scarf I thought I'd lost months ago. I distinctly remembered wearing it to work and assumed I'd left it on the bus. How did Mark get it? I started to panic, wondering if he'd been following me or going through my trash. The next package was even more unsettling. It contained a framed photo of Mark and me together, smiling at the camera. But I knew for certain we'd never taken a picture together. The image was clearly photoshopped, but it looked eerily real. My heart raced as I realized this situation was far more serious than I'd thought. I decided to confront Mark. I sent him a message asking him to stop sending gifts and to leave me alone. His response chilled me to the bone. He wrote that I had given him the most valuable gift of all, myself. He said he felt a deep connection to me and that we were meant to be together. From that point on, things escalated quickly. Mark started showing up at places I frequented, my favorite coffee shop, the grocery store, even outside my workplace. He always kept his distance but made sure I saw him. I felt constantly watched and on edge. The gifts became more personal and intrusive. He sent me a pillowcase that smelled like my perfume, a half-eaten candy bar of my favorite brand, and even a lock of what looked like my hair. I changed my locks, installed security cameras, and filed a police report, but they said there wasn't much they could do without direct threats or physical confrontation. I became a nervous wreck. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary, always looking over my shoulder. I couldn't sleep, jumping at every small noise. My friends and family were worried, but I was too embarrassed and scared to tell them the full story. One day, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing seemed to be missing or out of place, but I knew he had been there. On my pillow was a single red rose with a note that said, "Soon." That was the last straw. I packed a bag and fled to my parents' house in another state. I quit my job, changed my phone number, and deleted all of my social media accounts. I felt like I was running for my own life, all because of the simple Craigslist sale. For weeks, I barely left my parents' house. Every car that drove by made me flinch, and every unfamiliar face sent my heart racing. My parents were confused and worried, but I couldn't bring myself to explain everything. How could I tell them that a stranger was obsessed with me because I sold him a toaster oven? Slowly, I tried to rebuild my life. I found a job working from home and started therapy to deal with my anxiety. But even as months passed without any sign of Mark, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there waiting. One day, about 4 months after I'd moved, I received a letter at my parents' address. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. With shaking hands, I opened it, dreading what I might find inside. It was a simple note that read, "I miss you. We'll be together again soon." Enclosed was a small key, a copy of my old apartment key. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. How had he found me? How long had he known where I was? This time, I told my parents everything. They were horrified and immediately called the police. But again, there wasn't much they could do. The postmark on the envelope was from a city hundreds of miles away, and there was no concrete evidence of a threat. We increased security at the house, installing cameras and a new alarm system. I rarely went out alone, always having someone with me. My life became a prison of fear and paranoia. 6 months passed without any more contact from Mark. I started to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had given up. I began to venture out more, even making a few friends in my new town. But I'd never let my guard down completely. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I saw him. I was at the local grocery store, picking up some essentials when I spotted him at the end of the aisle. Our eyes met and he smiled, that same friendly smile from when we first met. Before I could react, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I dropped my basket and ran out of the store, fumbling for my phone to call my dad. As I waited in the parking lot, scanning frantically for any sign of Mark, I realized that this nightmare might never truly end. He had found me once, and he could do it again. Now I'm faced with an impossible decision. Do I run again, uprooting the small semblance of a life I've managed to build? Or do I stay and face this terror head on, knowing that he's out there, watching and waiting? I don't know what the future holds, but I know I can't keep living in fear. I'm working with a private investigator and a lawyer to explore my options for protection. I'm also sharing my story as a warning to others. What seemed like an innocent transaction turned into a life-altering ordeal. I decided to rent out my spare apartment. The place wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom unit above my garage, but it was cozy and perfect for a single person or a young couple. Within hours of posting the ad, I received several inquiries. One stood out, a young woman named Emily who seemed particularly eager to view the apartment. We arranged a time for her to come by the next day. When Emily arrived, I noticed she seemed a bit nervous. She fidgeted with her purse strap and glanced around constantly as we walked through the space. I chalked it up to first-time renter jitters and tried to put her at ease by highlighting the apartment's best features. Despite her initial nervousness, Emily warmed up as we talked. She asked thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and utilities, and by the end of the tour, she was smiling and nodding along. To my surprise, she said she wanted to take the apartment right away. We signed the lease that afternoon, and she moved in the following week. At first, everything seemed fine. Emily was quiet and kept to herself, which suited me just fine. I rarely saw her coming or going, but I could hear her moving around upstairs occasionally, so I knew she was there. It wasn't until about a month later that I started noticing strange things. Small items around my house began to disappear, a bottle of shampoo here, a roll of paper towels there. I thought I was just being forgetful, but the incidents kept happening. One day I realized I hadn't seen Emily in over a week. I tried calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text, but there was no response. Concerned, I decided to check on the apartment. When I knocked on the door, there was no answer. I used my spare key to enter and was shocked by what I found, or rather, what I didn't find. The apartment was completely empty. There was no furniture, no personal items, nothing to indicate anyone had ever lived there. It was as if Emily had vanished into thin air. I was baffled and more than a little unsettled. I checked the lease agreement, but everything seemed in order. Emily had paid her first month's rent and security deposit in cash, so there wasn't even a paper trail to follow. Weeks passed, and I tried to put the strange incident out of my mind, but then things took an even more bizarre turn. I started receiving bills for expensive purchases, designer clothes, electronics, even jewelry, all delivered to my address but in Emily's name. At first, I thought it was a mistake and tried to contact the companies to explain the situation. But they insisted the orders were legitimate and that I was responsible for payment since they were delivered to my address. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the police showed up at my door. They were looking for Emily in connection with several fraud cases and assumed I was her roommate. I tried to explain that she had only rented the apartment briefly and then disappeared, but they seemed skeptical. The officers asked to see the apartment, and I led them upstairs. To my shock, it was no longer empty. There were clothes strewn about, dirty dishes in the sink, and personal items scattered everywhere. It looked lived in, as if Emily had never left. I was stunned. I knew for a fact that the apartment had been empty just days before. How was this possible? The police seemed to think I was lying or covering for Emily. They took down my information and said they'd be in touch. Over the next few weeks, my life became a nightmare. More bills arrived, each more outrageous than the last. The police continued to hound me for information about Emily, clearly not believing my story. I even started receiving angry phone calls from people claiming Emily owed them money. I couldn't understand how this had happened. How had a simple rental agreement turned into such a mess? I replayed every interaction with Emily in my mind, trying to spot any red flags I might have missed. But she had seemed so normal, so unremarkable. As the bills piled up and the police pressure intensified, I began to feel like I was losing my mind. Was Emily real? Had I imagined the whole thing? The evidence in the apartment suggested she was still living there, but I never saw or heard her. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to check the apartment one last time. As I approached the door, I heard movement inside. My heart raced as I fumbled with the key, but when I pushed the door open, the apartment was empty again. No furniture, no clothes, no signs of life. I stood in the doorway, my mind reeling. What was happening? As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. There on the bare floor was a single sheet of paper. I picked it up with trembling hands and read the neatly typed message. Thank you for your hospitality. I hope you enjoyed our little game as much as I did. Until next time. The note was signed simply, Emily. I stared at the paper, a chill running down my spine. This wasn't over. Somehow I knew Emily would be back. and next time I'd be ready for her. As I locked up the apartment and headed back to my house, my mind raced with questions. Who was Emily really? How had she pulled off this elaborate scheme? And most importantly, what did she want? I knew one thing for certain: I'd never look at a Craigslist rental the same way again. As for Emily, wherever she was, I had a feeling our paths would cross again. And when they did, I'd be prepared. This time, the game would be on my terms. I posted a few listings for some gently used clothes. Nothing fancy, just everyday stuff I no longer wore. Within hours, I had a message from a woman named Sarah. She seemed interested in everything I had for sale, which was great. We exchanged a few messages about sizes and prices, and she agreed to buy most of the items. When we met up for the exchange, Sarah was friendly and chatty. She complimented my style and asked where I liked to shop. I thought nothing of it at the time, just assuming she was being polite. As we were wrapping up, she jokingly asked if she could buy the outfit I was wearing. I laughed it off, but something about the way she looked at me made me uneasy. Over the next few days, Sarah kept messaging me, asking if I had any more clothes to sell. She wanted to know my favorite colors and brands. At first, I tried to be nice, but her persistence started to bother me. I politely told her I didn't have anything else to sell, hoping she'd take the hint. But Sarah didn't stop. She began sending me pictures of outfits she'd bought, saying how they reminded her of my style. It was weird, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just socially awkward or lonely. Things took a turn for the worse when I started noticing Sarah around town. I'd see her at the coffee shop I frequented, wearing clothes similar to mine. Once I spotted her at the mall leaving a store I often shopped at. Each time she'd wave enthusiastically, acting like we were old friends. The final straw came when I ran into her at my usual grocery store. She was wearing an outfit almost identical to mine, right down to the shoes. But what really freaked me out was her hair. She dyed it to match my color and style exactly. When she saw me, her face lit up, and she started walking towards me with a big smile. I panicked and left my car in the aisle, practically running out of the store. My heart was racing as I drove home, constantly checking my rear-view mirror to make sure she wasn't following me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying all our interactions in my head, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Was she stalking me? Had she been following me all along? I felt violated and scared in my own home. The next day, I changed all my social media accounts to private and blocked Sarah's number. I even considered changing my hair color, but it felt like giving in to her obsession. For weeks, I was on edge everywhere I went. I'd scan every crowd for Sarah's face, jump at every ping on my phone. I started varying my routines, taking different routes to work, and shopping at new stores. It was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Gradually, the sightings became less frequent. I'd go days, then weeks without seeing her. But just when I'd start to relax, she'd pop up again. At a restaurant in a parking lot, always wearing something that mimicked my style. It's been months now, and I still catch glimpses of her occasionally. Sometimes I wonder if I'm imagining things, if my paranoia has taken over. But then I'll see a flash of familiar hair or a copycat outfit, and the fear comes rushing back. I've thought about moving, starting fresh somewhere new. But why should I have to uproot my life because of her? Plus, there's no guarantee she wouldn't find me again. So here I am, stuck in this bizarre game of cat and mouse with a woman who wants to be me. I've become hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on guard. I've stopped posting anything online about my life or my whereabouts. My friends think I'm being paranoid, but they don't understand how unsettling it is to have someone trying to become your doppelganger. The whole experience has made me realize how much of ourselves we unknowingly share with strangers. A simple clothes sale turned into a nightmare I never could have imagined. Now, every time I see someone wearing an outfit similar to mine, I can't help but wonder, is it just a coincidence, or is Sarah still out there, watching and waiting? I know I should probably report this to the police, but what would I say? That someone bought my clothes and copied my style. It sounds ridiculous even to me. So for now, I'm left to deal with this on my own, always looking over my shoulder, never quite sure if I'm safe. The worst part is not knowing what Sarah wants or how far she'll go. Will she eventually get bored and move on to someone else? Or is this just the beginning of something even more sinister? These questions keep me up at night, turning what should be a funny story about a weird Craigslist encounter into a real-life horror story. So if you're ever selling stuff online, be careful. You never know who's on the other end of that message. And maybe think twice before complimenting a stranger's style. you might end up with an unwanted twin. I was cleaning out my grandma's attic after she passed away and found a box of vintage photos. Most were of people I didn't recognize, so I figured I'd try to sell them online to collectors or something. Within a day of posting the listing, I got a response from a guy named Mark. He said he was a genealogist and would love to take a look at the photos. We arranged to meet at a local coffee shop so he could check them out. Mark seemed nice enough when we met, mid-40s, glasses, kind of nerdy looking. He got really excited looking through the photos and ended up buying the whole lot for $50. I was just happy to get rid of them and make a few bucks. A couple days later, Mark messaged me again. He said he'd been doing some research on the people in the photos and wondered if I wanted to hear what he found out. I was mildly curious, so I said sure. He started telling me all these detailed stories about distant relatives I'd never heard of before. At first it was kind of interesting, but then it started to feel a bit weird how much he seemed to know. Mark kept messaging me over the next few weeks with more family history tidbits. He'd ask oddly specific questions about my grandparents and great-grandparents. I started getting uncomfortable and giving vague answers, but he just got more persistent, saying things like, "I'm sure if you ask your mom, she'll remember Great-Aunt Mildred." I had no idea who he was talking about. Then things took an even stranger turn. Mark started sending me old photos he claimed were of my ancestors, but the people in them looked eerily familiar. One woman from the 1920s could have been my sister's twin. A man from the 1940s had my exact nose and jawline. It was seriously freaking me out. I finally worked up the nerve to tell Mark to stop contacting me. I said I appreciated his interest in genealogy, but I wasn't comfortable sharing any more personal information. His reply made my blood run cold. "You don't know who you really are yet. I have documents proving we're related. Don't you want to know the truth about your family?" I blocked his number immediately, but he found other ways to contact me. He made new email addresses, sent letters to my house. Each message got more unhinged, with bizarre claims about our supposed shared ancestry. He said we were descended from some obscure European royal line, that there was a vast conspiracy to hide our true heritage. It's been months now, and Mark still won't leave me alone. I've filed police reports, but they say he hasn't made any direct threats, so there's not much they can do. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, worried he's following me. I've had to change my routine, even considered moving, all because I tried to sell some old photos online. I keep wondering how Mark got all that information about my family. The stories he told seemed so specific and real. And those pictures of people who looked just like me and my relatives. Where'd those come from? Part of me is terrified to dig any deeper in case there's some truth to what he's saying, but mostly I just want this nightmare to end. Last week, I came home to find a thick manila envelope stuffed in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew it was from Mark. Inside were dozens of photocopied documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, old newspaper clippings, all supposedly proving our connection. I wanted to throw it all away, but curiosity got the better of me. I spent hours poring over the papers, trying to make sense of it all. Some of the names matched stories my grandparents had told me, places I knew my family had lived. It was unsettling how much of it lined up with what I already knew, but there were other things that seemed completely far-fetched, references to secret societies and hidden fortunes. It was like reading a conspiracy theory website. I made the mistake of mentioning some of it to my mom. She got really quiet and changed the subject. When I pressed her, she snapped at me to drop it. Said some things were better left in the past. Now I'm wondering what she might be hiding. I've started having nightmares about Mark. In my dreams, he's always lurking just out of sight, watching me. Sometimes I see him in crowds when I'm out, but when I look again, he's gone. I'm jumping at shadows, paranoid that he's going to show up at my door one day. My friends think I'm overreacting. They say I should just ignore him and he'll eventually get bored and move on. But they don't understand how persistent he is. How much he seems to know about me and my family. It's like he's obsessed with proving this connection between us. I've tried researching Mark online, but I can't find much. His social media profiles are locked down tight. The genealogy website he claimed to work for doesn't seem to exist. It's like he's a ghost, which only makes me more uneasy about the whole situation. Sometimes I wonder if I'm going crazy, if maybe there is some truth to what Mark is saying, and I'm the one in denial. But then I remind myself that normal people don't stalk and harass strangers over supposed family connections. Whatever his deal is not healthy or okay. I've learned my lesson about selling personal items to strangers. You never know what kind of creep might latch onto you. Now I'm stuck with this stalker who's convinced we're long-lost cousins or something. I don't know how to make him stop. Every time I think it's over, another weird message or package shows up. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'll ever feel safe again. All those family secrets and stories Mark told me swirl around in my head. Could any of it be true, or is he just a skilled con artist who's really good at finding lookalike photos? I guess I'll never know for sure. I just want my normal, boring life back. The one where I didn't have some creepy relative obsessed with me. I started seeing a therapist to help deal with the anxiety and paranoia. She's encouraged me to focus on the things I can control, to not let Mark's actions dictate my life. It helps sometimes, but other days it feels like he's won. Like he's wormed his way into my head and I'll never be free of him. I hope my story serves as a warning to others. Be careful what you share online, even if it seems harmless. You never know who might be out there, waiting to worm their way into your life. I made one simple post on Craigslist, and now I'm living in fear. Trust your gut if someone gives you a weird vibe. And maybe think twice before selling those old family heirlooms. Some things are better left in the attic, where they can't attract the attention of unhinged strangers bent on convincing you of some crackpot theory about your ancestry. And I'll never look at a family photo album the same way again. I never thought selling my old stuff on Craigslist would lead to this. It started innocently enough. I had a bunch of things cluttering out my apartment that I wanted to get rid of. Some books, a lamp, an old coffee table. Nothing special. I snapped a few photos, wrote up some quick descriptions, and posted the listings online. Within a day, I got a message about the coffee table. The buyer seemed normal, just asking the usual questions about dimensions and if I could hold it until the weekend. We arranged to meet at a nearby coffee shop for the exchange. When I got there, a guy in his mid-30s waved me over. He introduced himself as Ambient, and we made small talk while he looked over the table. He seemed friendly enough, complimenting my eclectic taste, as he called it. I didn't think much of it at the time. The sale went smoothly, and I figured that was that. But later that evening, I got another message from Ambient asking if I had any other furniture for sale. I told him no, just the few items I'd listed. He seemed disappointed, but thanked me anyway. A couple days later, Ottman messaged again, wondering if I had any artwork or decorative items available. I was a bit surprised he was still interested, but I did have an old mirror I was thinking of getting rid of. I sent him a photo, and he immediately said he wanted it. We met up again, this time at my apartment building since the mirror was too big to easily transport. Ottman seemed even more enthusiastic this time, asking all about where I got the mirror and my decorating style. It was a little weird how interested he was, but I brushed it off. That's when things started to get strange. Ottman began texting me every few days, always inquiring if I had anything new to sell. He'd ask about really specific items. Did I have any red scarves? What about brown leather boots? A vintage record player? I started to get uncomfortable with how persistent he was. I told him I didn't have anything else for sale, hoping he'd take the hint. But the messages kept coming. Then one morning, I opened my door to find a shopping bag sitting on the welcome mat. Inside it was a red scarf, almost identical to one Ammon had asked about before. There was a note that said, "This would look great on you." I felt a chill run down my spine. I messaged Ammon telling him to stop contacting me. He apologized, saying he just got carried away and thought we could be friends. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that was the end of it. But a week later, another package appeared. This time it was a pair of brown leather boots in my size. The note read, "These are perfect for your style." I was seriously freaked out now. How did he know my shoe size? Had he been watching me? I considered calling the police, but what could I even say? Some guy was leaving me creepy gifts. The packages kept coming. Clothes, accessories, even small pieces of furniture, all tailored to my tastes. The notes got more and more personal. "I saw you wearing that blue sweater yesterday. This scarf would match perfectly. I noticed you like to read in that chair by the window. This lamp would give you better light." I was terrified to leave my apartment. I started having nightmares about Ammon breaking in, rearranging my belongings, watching me sleep. I put up blackout curtains and extra locks, but nothing made me feel safe. I tried changing my routine, taking different routes to work, varying my schedule. But somehow, Ammon always seemed to know where I'd been, and what I'd been doing. The gifts became even more specific. A coffee mug from the cafe I'd started going to instead of my usual spot. A book I'd been eyeing at the new bookstore across town. I stopped answering my phone, deleted my social media accounts, and asked my friends not to post anything about me online. But it didn't seem to make a difference. Amon's notes implied he still knew everything about my daily life. One day, I came home to find my entire living room rearranged. The furniture was all in different places, and there were new curtains on the windows. On the coffee table was a note. I hope you like the new layout. I think it really suits you. That was the last straw. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, not telling anyone where I was going. For a few weeks, things were quiet. No packages, no messages. I started to relax, thinking maybe he'd given up. But then my friend got a Craigslist message about some furniture she was selling. The buyer's name, Ambient, and he was asking if she knew me, said he was an old friend trying to get back in touch. My blood ran cold. How had he found me? What was I supposed to do now? I decided I had to leave town altogether. I quit my job, sold what I could, and packed up my car. I drove for days, staying at cheap motels and paying cash for everything. I ended up in a small town 2 states away. I found a room to rent and a part-time job at a local diner. I used a fake name and backstory, always looking over my shoulder, afraid Ammon would somehow track me down. For a while, things seemed okay. I started to feel like maybe I'd finally escaped. But then one day at work, a customer left me a tip with a note. Red really is your color. You should wear it more often. I panicked and ran out of the diner, leaving everything behind. I drove until my car ran out of gas, then started walking. I hitchhiked when I could, always moving, never staying in one place for more than a night or two. Now I'm writing this from a motel room in some nameless town. I don't know where I am or where I'm going next. All I know is I can't stop running. Every gift, every note, every sign that Ammon is still out there watching me. It's all burned into my memory. If you're reading this, be careful. You never know who might become obsessed with your style or with you. And once they do, there may be no escaping them. It all started when I needed someone to watch my house for a weekend while I visited my parents out of state. I'd never used a house sitter before, but my neighbor suggested it might be a good idea since I'd be gone for 3 days. The ad was straightforward, just looking for a responsible adult to stay at my place, bring in the mail, and make sure everything was okay. I got a few responses, but one stood out. A woman named Sarah emailed saying she had lots of experience house sitting and loved taking care of homes. Her message was polite and professional. We exchanged a few emails, and she seemed perfect for the job. We met briefly so I could give Sarah a key and show her around. She was quiet and unassuming, probably in her mid-30s. Nothing stood out about her appearance or demeanor. If anything, she was almost forgettable. I left for my trip feeling good about my choice. The weekend went by quickly, and when I got home Sunday evening, everything looked fine at first glance. The house was tidy, mail was on the counter, plants were watered. Sarah had left a note saying she hoped I had a good trip and thanking me for the opportunity. Pretty standard stuff. It wasn't until a few days later that I started noticing odd little things. The clothes in my dresser were folded differently than how I usually do it. Some knickknacks on shelves seemed to be in slightly different spots. Photos and frames were askew, like they had been picked up and put back down. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the weirdness kept popping up. I found a handwritten grocery list in a kitchen drawer that wasn't my handwriting. The shower curtain was on backwards. My toothbrush was on the opposite side of the sink. Each thing on its own was tiny and easy to dismiss, but they kept adding up, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that someone had been going through all my stuff. I started obsessively checking to see if anything was missing, but couldn't find anything obviously gone. About 2 weeks after my trip, I got an email from Sarah. She thanked me again for letting her stay at my place and said she hoped I didn't mind that she stayed a bit longer. My stomach dropped. She was supposed to be gone before I even got back that Sunday. How long had she actually been in my house? I replied asking what she meant, but never heard back. I changed the locks that day. For weeks afterwards, I felt on edge in my own home. I kept expecting to find Sarah there when I got back from work. Every little noise at night made me jump. Nothing else happened, but I still felt unsettled. Had she made copies of my key, gone through all my personal belongings, slept in my bed? I had no proof of anything beyond the door being locked when I got home that Sunday, but clearly she had been there longer than agreed upon. I'd never used Craigslist for house sitting again. These days, I just ask my parents to check on the place if I'm gone. The whole experience left me feeling violated in a way that's hard to describe. It wasn't like a break-in where things are stolen or damaged. It was more insidious. The idea that someone had been living in my personal space, touching my things, invading my privacy in subtle ways. Sometimes I still wonder about Sarah. Who was she really? Why did she stay longer than arranged? What was she looking for? I never found evidence that anything was stolen. Maybe she just liked pretending my life was hers for a few days. Or maybe she was casing the place for a future burglary. I'll never know for sure. The thing that gets me is how normal she seemed when we met. There were no red flags, nothing to indicate she'd do something so invasive. It's a reminder that you can't always tell what a person is really like from a brief interaction. I'm more cautious now about who I let into my home. No more strangers from the internet, that's for sure. If I need a house sitter, it's friends and family only. I've mostly moved past the creepy feelings, but every once in a while I'll notice something slightly out of place and get a little chill. Old habits die hard, I guess. The whole thing taught me to trust my instincts more. Those little oddities I noticed at first, I should have paid more attention instead of brushing them off. When things feel off, there's usually a reason. I'm glad nothing worse happened, but it was definitely a wake-up call about being careful who you trust with access to your personal space. As time passed, I tried to put the incident behind me, but occasionally something would happen to bring it all rushing back, like the time I found a bobby pin in my bathroom that wasn't mine, or when I noticed a faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on one of my sweaters. Each time I'd wonder if Sarah had somehow gotten back in, or if these were just leftover traces from her extended stay. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on the lookout for signs that someone else had been in my space. It was exhausting, constantly second-guessing everything. Was that cup really where I left it? Had I moved that book, or had someone else touched it? The peace I once felt in my own home was shattered. I found myself doing deep cleans of the house, trying to erase any lingering presence of Sarah. I threw out things she might have touched, rearranged furniture, even painted a couple of rooms. Anything to make the space feel like mine again. Friends told me I was overreacting, that I should just let it go, but they hadn't experienced that slow-dawning realization that a stranger had been living in their home, using their things, invading their privacy. It's not something you can easily shake off. I tried to find out more about Sarah, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air. The email address she'd used no longer worked. I couldn't find any trace of her online. It was as if she'd never existed at all. Sometimes I wonder if she's done this to other people. Are there more homeowners out there who had their space invaded in this subtle, creepy way? The thought of Sarah moving from house to house, temporarily taking over people's lives, gives me chills. The experience changed how I interact with my home. I'm more appreciative of my personal space now, more protective of it. I've installed a security system and cameras. Maybe it's overkill, but it helps me sleep at night. I'm not great with home repairs, so I decided to look for a locksmith online. After browsing through a few options, I found a guy advertising his services at a reasonable price. His ad seemed legit, and he had some positive reviews, so I gave him a call. The locksmith showed up the next day, right on time. He was a middle-aged man, kinda average-looking, nothing out of the ordinary. He got to work on the lock while I hung around, making small talk. The job took about an hour, and when he was done, the lock worked perfectly. I paid him, thanked him, and thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Later that evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It was the locksmith, saying he forgot to mention some important security tips for my home. I thought it was a bit weird that he saved my number, but I brushed it off as him being thorough. The tips seemed helpful, so I thanked him and didn't think much of it. The next day, another text came in. This time, he was suggesting places where I should install additional locks. I started to feel a little uncomfortable. I hadn't asked for this advice, and it felt like he was pushing for more work. I replied politely, saying I'd think about it, hoping that would be the end of it. But the texts kept coming. Every day, sometimes multiple times a day. He'd send reminders about home security, ask if I considered his suggestions, even offer to come by and do a free security assessment. I started ignoring the messages, but they didn't stop. A few days into this, I began noticing small things around my apartment. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid because of the texts. but that couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My coffee mug wasn't where I usually left it. A book on my shelf was slightly out of place. My jacket, which I always hung on the same hook, was on a different one. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just forgetful, or maybe the stress of the constant texts was making me notice things I normally wouldn't. But then I realized the locks felt different. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed when I used my key. The thought that someone might have been in my home made my skin crawl. Just when I was considering calling the police, my phone rang. It was him, the locksmith. He said he was just checking to make sure I was living safely. My blood ran cold. I had never given him my personal number, only my landline for the initial service call. How did he get it? I hung up without saying much, my mind racing. I started piecing things together. The texts, the misplaced items, the altered locks. Had he made copies of my keys? Had he been coming into my home when I was out? I didn't wait to find out. I called a friend and asked to stay at their place for a few days. Then I called a different locksmith, one from a reputable company, and it had all my locks changed. I also filed a report with the police, showing them the texts and explaining my suspicions. The cops took it seriously, thankfully. They investigated and found out the guy wasn't even a licensed locksmith. He had a history of similar complaints, though nothing had ever been proven. They couldn't arrest him without concrete evidence, but they did issue a warning. For weeks after, I jumped at every sound in my apartment. I installed a security system and cameras. I changed my phone number. Slowly, the texts and calls stopped, but the feeling of violation lingered. I started to become hyper-aware of my surroundings. Every time I came home, I'd scan the street before entering my building. I checked for signs of forced entry before unlocking my door. I even started varying my routine, taking different routes to work, shopping at different stores, anything to feel less predictable, less vulnerable. My friends noticed the change in me. I stopped inviting people over, always preferring to meet in public places. When they asked what was wrong, I'd brush it off, not wanting to seem paranoid. But inside, I was constantly on edge. One night, about a month after changing my locks, I woke up to a noise in my living room. My heart raced as I lay there, frozen in fear. Was it him? Had he found a way in despite the new locks? I slowly reached for my phone, ready to call 911. But then I heard a meow. It was just my neighbor's cat that sometimes snuck in through the fire escape. I broke down crying, partly from relief, partly from the realization of how much this situation had affected me. That was the turning point. I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I started seeing a therapist to work through my anxiety. I joined a support group for victims of stalking and home invasion. Slowly, I began to reclaim my sense of safety. I also became an advocate for stricter regulations on locksmiths and other home service providers. I shared my story on local community forums, warning others about the potential dangers of hiring from unverified online ads. I even spoke at a city council meeting, pushing for better vetting processes for service providers. It's been 6 months now, and things are better. I still have moments of paranoia, but they're less frequent. I've learned to trust my instincts more, but also not to let fear control my life. I've made my home as secure as I can, but I've also learned that true safety comes from within, from feeling empowered and prepared. Looking back, I realize how easily this happened. One small decision, hiring a locksmith from an online ad, spiraled into this nightmare. It's scary how vulnerable we can be in our own homes, how easily our sense of safety can be shattered. I'm sharing this story as a warning. Be careful who you let into your home. Trust your instincts if something feels off. Do your research before hiring anyone, especially for services that involve your home security. And remember, sometimes the people we think are there to protect us can be the very ones we need protection from. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned about the importance of community, of looking out for each other. I've learned about resilience, about how much stronger we are than we think. And I've learned that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we can control how we respond.